Let my life be prayer. Oh, let my life be prayer. Oh, let my life be. So it's today is May the 23rd. We're at St. John's, West Toronto. I'm Christopher Reddy, and we're here with Gary Vandermeer, who was our rector from September 2001 to September 2011, right?
That's right.
Almost
yes.
exactly 10 years.
Yeah.
And Gary's went on to St. Anne's and then to St. John, another St. John's in Ottawa. And anyway, I just wanted to have some time, and he happens to be coming to Toronto today, this week. So we offered to come here and do a little interview.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and it brings back a lot of memories to be in the space. And I remember the process of coming to the colors and the people who were here. It was a great decade. It was a wonderful time, time in my life, and I met wonderful people here.
Well, it was very transformative for us. I was here too, so yeah. I observed that we started just before you came. We were here with Father Christian for a few years, and then then we had a bit of an interim, and then you came, and then it was, very active period.
Yeah.
So, all right. Anyway, we're here. It's also the 100th anniversary of this building, so that's when sort of the idea behind this is the opportunity to talk to Gary and play such a big role in this particular space. So I just have some questions. We might go off track, I'm sure, as it goes along, but I'm going to start off with what were your first impressions of St. John's when you served as a Trinity student, starting in December '89? I guess you said how long was that?
Yeah,
period?
I was here for a full academic year. It was actually from September through of '89 through to May.
Okay.
And at the time, Robert Hagler, one of the monks of the Order of the Holy Cross, was the rector, and Brother William Sibley was the prior at the house next door and was very active. And so I was advised by the placement director to check out 3 churches, and the placement director was Bishop Victoria Matthews. She later became bishop, and she recommended that this be the one that I should go to, and so I did. And Robert Hagler was assigned to be my field placement director, and he gave me as a role to bring 2 special needs young people from a group home to church every Sunday. And one of them was a young man with autism, and the other was a young woman with Down syndrome. So I would go out to somewhere way out in Etobicoke and pick them up and bring them by taxi and get the taxi chit, which would be reimbursed, bring them to church, and then try and get some social engagement to happen afterwards. And it was a really interesting thing to do because it was hard, and I didn't know what I was doing. So I learned how to be with them by being with them, and then by reflecting on it with Father Robert. And at the time, there were a number of families with special needs, young people, their children here with them in church.
Yeah.
And this had grown up to be what they thought of as a ministry that came out of wanting to have a building that was physically accessible, and they realized that there were other kinds of accessibility, especially around mental health. And so I brought these 2 young people, but there were several other families, and they would have socials like lunches in their homes after church. So I would bring, John and Angie were their names, I would bring them to these homes and then bring them back by taxi to the group home at the end of the day. And I would come back during the week to have a supervision session with Father Robert, and he was the one who pointed me to books of theology that he thought that I should read. And over the process of that year, we came to this discernment of asking them whether they would like to be baptized, and respecting that they had the capacity to make that decision themselves and to do a preparation. And we did those baptisms at the Easter Vigil. And it was a beautiful service where I even have pictures of when they're handed their candle and they're just glowing and beaming with this feeling of being special and included and valued. And out of that experience, I then got a job in a group home with special needs people because I was so moved by this experience, and I needed a job to cover my academic costs. And so it opened a world for me of looking after and being with people.
Yeah, well, that was a big part of the church at that time. It was before I came, but I've read about
Yeah.
how that kind of evolved through the role of the brothers, particularly, and Father Christian. All right, that's good. So I guess you kind of cover the next question, what your field work involved. Any particular notable memories from that year, out beyond what you just described, about the church itself?
The church made no impression on me as a building. I mean, it was painted beige.
Yeah,
There were many churches that looked like this. There were people here that I then recognized when I came back 10 years later to be the incumbent. And like, for example, the Crummies, I remembered them as a young couple with little children.
They're still here.
Yeah, but seeing them 10 years later when I came back. And just a little bit about how I came back. I was ordained in '93. I did an assistant curacy in Orillia, and then I went to Port Perry, and that was my first parish. I was in that small town for 5.5 years, but about at the beginning of year 5, maybe halfway through the 4th year, it was announced in the diocesan newspaper that Christian Swain was going to retire. And I had, these formative memories of my time with the monks and doing that baptism process. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that's the one. That's the church I want to go to. And so I called the bishop's office and said, when it's time, I want to be considered for that church. And so it happened that they did interviews, and the process at the time was that they interviewed a number of candidates. Then they gave their ranked choices to the bishop's office, mm-hmm. and then the bishop called me to say that he would like to offer me the position. So I came here at the beginning of September in 2001.
Just before 9/11.
Just before 9/11. In fact, 9/11, we were at our clericus, the local Anglican clergy. I was meeting them for the first time, and this thing came on the news, and we dismissed the clericus early, and we all went home. Yeah. And it was this whirlwind of, the world changed, and we didn't know what the world was going to be.
Yeah, we were in PEI at the time. Andrew was going to a conference, and Ellie was about 4, and I was driving around.
That was probably a factor also in when I was coming to the church, the selection committee, after the interview, I met with them because I wanted to know, okay, why did you pick me? And they said, so we've saved the money to repaint the church interior. Do you think we should do that before we have the induction service?
Oh, right.
And I thought, I don't know who these people are. I don't want to step on any toes. Why don't we wait? And a part of it was the world just felt uncertain at that point.
Well,
with 9/11, and so we waited. And so my first impression of coming to St. John's was the Sunday service was 35 people, and so my first impression of what was different from 2011. From back when from 2001, from when I was there 10 years before, was that it was a much smaller congregation.
Yeah, we're smaller still.
And the first thought that was in my mind was, how are we going to have bums in seats? How are we going to get from this to what would be a healthy congregation? Mm-hmm. And to me, looking around, the church was beige and kind of moldering, and there are many churches that look like this. My thought was, all right, well, as it had been pointed out in the interview process, there's a church at Kiel and Bloor, there's another one at Bloor West Village and Bloor, then there's another one in the neighborhood, so St. Martin's, St. Olave's, and St. Paul's. How are we going to be distinctive?
Yeah.
And so then when this conversation came up about repainting the church, I said, well, what color did you want to be painted? And they said, oh, beige. And I thought, what? You're just like every other church, and you have this grand opportunity to be something different that says something about you, and that's what you're going to pick? And so I said, no, we need to wait.
We're not a beige church.
Yeah, actually one person said, well, after all, we're not a beige congregation.
Exactly, yeah.
And I found that I know who said that, and that was a very helpful comment to have, because it meant we could buy time to think through, well, what kind of congregation are we if we're not beige? And the process was we invited people to paint swatches of their favorite colors. Oh, they were horrible. Like somehow it just didn't work. There were these awful colors on the wall. And we had this meeting where we thought, okay, they wanted me to just pick because none of them liked the colors. And I realized I was out of my depth. I am not a color person. At least I didn't think I was. and so I was really resisting this idea that I would be forever blamed for these colors. And something happened at that point. We found out that there was another church that had a really adventurous color scheme. It was actually Runnymede United.
Oh, yeah.
And so we went to see it. I went with Bruce Alton, who was the honorary assistant at the time. And we were so impressed. It was different blues and yellows. And we found out who the artist was. It was Stuart Reed, who was a stained glass artist, actually. But he had painted the church interior. And he had been inspired by the Ukrainian influence in the Bloor West Village. So, Runnymede United wasn't a Ukrainian church, but he wanted to say something about the local expression of culture.
We have a high Ukrainian population, and we have the Ukrainian festival.
That's right. So he wanted to resonate with that, and we just loved how the colors worked. They just worked, and we didn't know how we could do that, so we arranged to meet with him, and he said, the way you do this is you have a process. And so we called a meeting of everyone, and certain people said, well, I don't want colors that are...
Well, that's okay. That's just the doorbell.
Okay. We don't want colors that are... They wanted to say gaudy. And Stuart stopped them, and he said, the creative process is not about negative feedback. It's about giving your positive assessment of what's important. And you're not allowed to suggest colors. Suggest the qualities of what your church life is. What does it mean to you to be in church? What are your values? And then I'm the color theory professor. I'm going to come back to you with a proposal, which he did. And what he did was he spent hours in the church. Like, we gave him a key, and he would be in here at different times of the day. And I would see him because I would be in the office. And eventually he came with his thing, and he said, everything is competing with everything else. You got all different tones of wood, and none of them match. And then you have all these colors in the windows, and something needs to bring them together. So he took these colors from the windows. He took from our conversation where we said we're a church about resurrection, we're about rebirth, because we wanted to revitalize. We're about rebirth, we're about resurrection. He said, well, let's go with Easter colors. And he meant those, those Easter eggs, the candied Easter eggs. And so he said, I've taken all these colors out of the windows, so they will connect. They will go with everything. They'll make the disharmony of the different wood tones come together. They'll mute that, and they'll give a feeling of unity to the place. So he made a mock-up in Photoshop, and we had this up for months, and people looked at it, and finally we had to vote on it, and we passed it. And then the painters came, and the church was filled with scaffolding, and it was exciting, actually.
Oh, I know.
It was exciting.
I watched all this too.
Anyways, we were very excited about this. There was some anxiety about it as people saw the colors. They were anxious. We worshiped in the basement, but people were anxious. And then it was done, and we loved it, except for the music director, who said, this is like having all the chords on the organ down at once. and it started another conversation about what kind of music goes with this kind of community.
I didn't realize there was that connection with that.
The music director had a really visceral response, and that brought out a repositioning of what kind of music is right for a congregation that says this about itself, with the space and with the values that they had said. And the leadership team, the church wardens, decided we need to end the contract with this particular music director. And initially, the wardens thought, okay, we'll just hire somebody else. But the bishop had referred me to a priest colleague who could be a consultant for us. And he said, to me, he was very wise. This was Tim Elliott, Dr. Tim Elliott. He said, you know, if it was just about the agreeableness of the person or the style of playing, sure, you might just hire a different music director. But some of your feedback was actually about repertoire and kinds of music. And maybe it would be good for you to have a time-out experiment of just having different kinds of musicians and see if you can cultivate what is the real voice of this community. It's really great words, right? To figure out the real voice of the church. And so that was kind of thrown back on me. Well, I don't, just like with music, with colors, I don't know a lot about music. What am I going to figure out about music? And so I started asking people, you know, who are some people you know who like to do music? And there's one of my clergy friends who said, well, you know, have you ever heard of Ken Whiteley?
We just had him back.
Yes, and so I cold called Ken Whiteley. She gave me his number, and I called him. And you know, this awkward conversation of, you don't know me, and I heard about you, and I'm a priest of a church where we want to have a different style of music. We want to try some new things. And your style of music, we would really love to see how that would fit here. So he was the first one. And initially, he would try to sing along to hymns with his guitar, and he would chord it out. And then we just started singing his songs. And he had this beautiful song, "Let My Life Be Prayer."
Yeah,
and that was the language of this church coming to its singing voice of content, "Let My Life Be Prayer," said something to the people who were here.
Yeah, and we had a great response. He sang it again. He was here just for our Cornerstone weekend.
Yeah.
Or the Patronal Festival.
Yeah. He became a regular. And also we had Ann Liederman, and these are names I got from Ken and from other people. She was a fiddler in the kind of Celtic Canadian style. And Yaroslav Chervenets, who was the accordion player for the Cowboy Junkies.
Yeah, we're having a concert on Saturday night, and he and Meer.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So
and I loved how he had this album called Dronehead. And it was basically meditative chords.
Yeah.
And he would do this during communion, and it was the most beautiful thing.
Yeah, there was a concert he did a few years ago.
Yeah.
We went to.
And then I was at a church growth conference, and there were these young folks singing kind of praise band things. And I thought, wow, I wonder if we could have that. Because, you know, the church had a really kind of inclusive theology, and a lot of praise band stuff is very conservative evangelical music.
Yeah.
And so anyways, I was going home from this conference. I was on the subway platform, and I saw the young guy from the praise group, and I thought, I'm going to take this as a divine sign. So I went up and I introduced myself and thanked him for his music, and I said, I did the sale. I did the cold call sale of, you know, I'm in a church where we want to do music. Where can I hear you sing these things? And I would really love to know if you would come play for us. So they had a church service on an evening in a downtown church. I went to listen to them, and basically it was to poach them from this congregation. And I mean not poach, because they were going to keep on singing in the evening. And anyways, there were 4 of them, 4 young people, and they came and they introduced us to These Are the Days of Elijah. And you know, there were some really evangelical kinds of songs. And people just did it. They rose to the occasion. There's something about good music that, you know, that kind of trumps the words.
That's what we're working on still. And
yeah.
Because we kind of lost, I mean, with the pandemic, we've kind of lost some of that. We had some good people, a guy called Noah Francois.
Yeah.
He did a lot of improvisation, and during the pandemic he played from home.
Yeah.
But through the post Eucharist thing, he would do an improv.
Yeah.
And he had some concerts.
So we had this roster, and we by 1 year in, people were saying, all right, so are we going to hire an organist? And the tone of the feedback from the congregation was, actually, we like the variety show. We like the roster. And so we actually continued that for my whole 10 years, to have the roster of musicians. And we had organists as well. We had jazz piano. In fact, Tim Elliott, who was the priest consultant, came and he played jazz on the piano and the organ. And so we had this regular movement through different styles of music, and we came to our favorites. And I think we came to, what is the singing voice that expresses this community's identity and theology? And some of that was given that these are the people who are here. Some of it is given that this is the kind of space we're in. This is the kind of music that fits us. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of, those two things kind of flowed together.
And that's been a big part of what keeps us, Andrea particularly. She manages a lot of the music stuff now, and getting a roster and getting people. Allie's grown up. She's part of that, and she sings very well. She's excellent at it, so she fits in, So anyway, what did you know about the history?
Yeah, so what I knew about the history was actually very, very little. When I came to do my placement, I think I learned that St. John's had relocated from St. John's Road. But that didn't stay with me as much as this story of wanting to do inclusion in a more just way about special needs. And then coming back in 2001, what I noticed was those special needs were still here, but it was almost like people were saying it because they were used to saying it rather than that they were really feeling passionate about it. Right. And there was this mission statement about we are not a building and a list of all the kind of people we include. And I found that actually to be an exciting statement because yes, it had special needs in it, but it also had LGBTQ, it had a whole bunch of things in it. Yep. And the whole idea of inclusion was important to me because at that point I was a closeted gay man who did the don't ask, don't tell version of getting ordained. And so to be in a church where they wanted to care about inclusion, that really resonated with me. And so I found that lots of people cared about that, wanted to go to the pride parades. But there was also an opposition to it from some people who said, of course we welcome everyone so that we can convert them to the truth, right? Like there was a dissonant kind of voice in there at the same time.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
But the inclusion part was tacked onto this statement, we are not a building. And it was interesting to have a statement that says we are not a building, but to be using the building to express what is distinctive about this particular community. It was kind of holding two things together at the same time.
Well, and as I was saying before, that inclusiveness spirit comes out of the building and its changes and its adaptation to meet the physical accessibility issue. So that kind of drove some of that thinking initially, and then it kind of evolved from there. So, okay. So what were your priorities? In particular, other than what you...
So my priorities were, first of all, when I saw how small the congregation was on this first Sundays, was how do we have more people here? And secondly, how do we be more distinctive? Because people could go anywhere. And at the time, I thought of it as a neighborhood church, and I heard people grumbling that, it's buried in a neighborhood. I didn't think it was buried in a neighborhood. There was a bed and breakfast across the street, and a high school over there, and a priory over here, and lots of people, lots of foot traffic. But how do you become a destination? And so we did some pamphlet drop things, putting them in people's mailboxes.
Actually knocking on the door, too.
We did. That's
something I was sort of suggesting.
And it was unnerving to do it. This cold call, sell yourself thing that I started with Ken Whiteley, harder when you're at a door and you don't know who's on the other side of the door.
But you came from a bit of a marketing background. You had a little bit of different approach, and you're younger, and
that's right.
Which makes a big difference. We had, Father Christian he was very progressive too, but he was in the later end of his time, and so there was less of that kind of bold and energy. And you kind of embody that.
And some of it is, you just use what comes your way. For example, right after we had done the colors and the new music roster thing, I went to the bishop's office because I had a summer vacation coming with no plans. I had been a person who goes on long-distance bicycle trips, and I wanted to do something different. And the bishop said, well, we have this prospect of developing a twinning relationship with a diocese in South Africa. Would you like to go to South Africa? And I went, and in a way it was this exciting thing because I went into churches of different cultures. South Africa has great diversity to it. And so I was in churches of different cultures, and there was a church that they had painted their interior orange and yellow and blue, I think it was. Like not quite the same colors as here, but it was just this great feeling of, hey, we're not the only ones trying to figure this out. And so to try and develop twinning relationships, which ended up being actually really hard work. And in a way, it was one of the things we tried was developing, relationship with churches further afield. But the real challenge was developing relationships with people in the neighborhood. That was the real challenge, and that was really my priority. And one thing I did was develop a worship schedule where there was a job for everybody, so that that people would feel they had a stake in the service itself and their part in it, and to have a rotation of people, so people would feel like they had a job. It was important for them to come.
Well, that continued.
Yeah,
That's
right.
I mean, it's still, we have less people, but it's still a bit of a struggle.
Yeah.
But there's still that idea, I think is important. And well, it comes out of the shift to the alternative service in the 80s, and then and bringing the altar down here and opening up the service to everybody to do readings and all that kind of stuff. So that was part of the development of the church, really, and that was a big deal at the time. Okay, was anybody around here that sort of you relied on in terms of your priorities, and like you weren't on your own, you were kind of had some support? People?
So I had Bruce Alton as the honorary assistant, and Bruce was on the faculty of the University of Toronto.
Oh, I know. He was my neighbor.
He was a wonderful person to know. He was a good colleague. Linda Ward was the administrator secretary, and then we had the music director, and then we now had a roster. And in effect, I relied on one person for the musician roster, and that was Mae Webster. And together, we learned how to pick the pieces of music that would fit the style of the musician who was coming. And then when Bruce became less well, there was a Sunday where we had a Mozart Eucharist. And I had found some musicians, and the whole service, and it was on the board outside, Mozart Eucharist. And that was the first Sunday that Bob Shantz and his wife Allison came.
Oh, right, yeah, he told that story,
Yeah. And so Bob then became, over time, my honorary assistant.
Yeah.
And when Bob became my honorary assistant, I had a real colleague we would have lots of conversations. It was really great. There's another piece of that story in there before I get to something that happened with Bob. In that period, I had a serious relationship, my first major relationship in my life. A guy from the United States who would come to visit, and that was over the course of 4 years. And during that time, people started going to the Pride Parade. I thought that, I was just being very circumspect and no one could see through this. And I've realized since that, people are smart and they're not blind, and that everyone at St. John's had figured it out. The process of talking about same-sex blessings also happened in that period.
Yep.
And we did a cafe church Sunday where we had the church, instead of with pews, it was set up with round tables and people talking to each other. And we invited LGBTQ parishioners from other parishes to come and be with us. And we planned it over the course of the summer because we proposed at vestry that we would study the matter of same-sex blessings. And so we planned it over the summer, what questions we would have, and each table had some St. John's parishioners and some people from somewhere else, and asked questions about, what is your life like? And this great takeaway was, wow, their lives are no different from ours. Same kinds of challenges and needs and pastoral concerns.
Yep.
So a really wonderful time of coming to a reckoning.
Since then, we had Quakerist. How do you pronounce it again?
Yeah, that was after my time.
Yeah.
But in this process, what we did was we were going to vote at the vestry meeting.
Right.
And by the time we voted, we had lost a whole bunch of people because they knew that the vote would not go the way they wanted it to go. And so the vestry meeting in that year it passed. There were 2 people that voted against, but that next Sunday, it was almost like the church was back down to the 35 people of my first season of being here. And what we did was, we were really discouraged. We wondered, what were we going to do? But we put the rainbow sticker on the church sign, and this was in maybe early May. By October, we had replaced and more the people that we had lost.
Yeah.
And there were a few anxious people in the congregation who, when we were talking about this, said, but we don't want to become the church of the gay community. And we had to point out that, this is High Park, it's not church in Wellesley. And in fact, what we drew were progressive-minded, straight people who didn't want to belong to an intolerant church. And we also had a few gay couples and two lesbian couples, but the real draw was we were now reaching out into the neighborhood with something to say to people who were suspicious about church, that not all churches are fundamentalist, and if you wanted to belong to a church that was actually progressive and welcoming, this would be the one. And so it was this great burst of new energy that happened within that 6-month period. And it was exciting and beautiful, and people got involved, and new people became wardens. And then over the course of that period, it was a couple years of really enjoying that leadership. My personal relationship came to an end, and right around the time that Bob Shantz became the honorary assistant. And so when Bob became the honorary assistant, he said, "So, do you think you'd like to go on a sabbatical?"
Okay.
And I thought, oh yes, would I love to go on a sabbatical. I had been involved in a church planting committee of the diocese, and so I was really curious about how other churches did things and to be able to go and study that. So I went to England for 3 months. And St. John's was really wonderful. They developed a whole leadership process where it'd be a team that would run the church. Bob would be in charge, but he would be only working part-time because this team would run things.
Yep.
And they did a great job, and I did hear about it, but I had a break from it all. And then I came back, and this is when things got hard. There's an annual report where I say we did not have the year we planned.
Yeah.
And the reason is that when I got back from the sabbatical, which was not planned, things were really different. The people who had been on the leadership team were tired. They wanted to hand it all back. There was a person who was had been a significant financial contributor to the church, a very conservative person who was treating it as a tithe, and she had decided she needed a change in her life, and she moved away. There was a family with children in the youth group age that wanted a bigger church with a bigger youth ministry, and they left. And then we had a meeting where there was a thunderstorm, and the rain came in through the roof right here. It poured down. I could see you have a line there where new water may have come down, but that's where it poured down. And we entered this new conversation about, should we even be here? Can we handle being in a building like this at some point? And we actually put together a group of people to study, should we go be rental in a storefront? Should we merge with another church? And we ended up coming around to, no, we need to recommit to growing this church in this neighborhood, and there are some things we need to do about that. So one of them was we needed a new roof. And so we took the money out of the rectory fund to put on a new roof. And there was some creativity about, well, what color should it be? Should it be just black? And we said, well, the inside's purple, yellow, and green. Surely we can make the outside fit with the inside. So we got a green roof. But the other things were probably more important than the roof. That was just holding the building together. The other things were, we decided we wanted to have our own version of Christianity 101. We wanted to equip people to figure out what about Christianity they were interested in and what kind of Christianity. And so we put together a group to kind of brainstorm, and people that wanted to be baptized or confirmed and people who were just interested. And we asked them, well, what would you want to know more about? And we grouped it into categories, and then people took it away and said, all right, I'm going to learn about this part, and then I'm going to present it.
Right, yeah.
And so that first Christianity 101, out of that came sessions where it'd be two people would have their turn to present what they had learned about that aspect of Christianity. Some of it was church history, some of it was the Bible, and they would present it, and the rest of us, it was lovely. I guess it was people who knew how to go take a little research project and come back and communicate. And it was very human and anecdotal and earthy. And so they would tell what they learned, and we had baptisms come out of this and confirmations. There was one baptism where we had a swimming pool, a little wading pool in the middle of the church. This is for France. And we
Oh.
poured the water over his head, 3 different
Oh, right,
pitchers,
yeah.
poured the water over Franz's head.
That's right.
And it felt like magic that this way that we had come up with this process that was about us and about what we wanted to know, and to see somebody say, yeah, I want that for me. And so we had a couple years of doing this Christianity 101 as a homegrown thing. And it's almost like the hard point of, coming back from my Sabbath leave to things feeling like they were in disarray, galvanized us to say, all right, now what are we going to do about this? And so we dealt with the wherewithal stuff of the building, and we went into something, what do we really care about? Well, people really care about why be Christian when you could just belong to a social club. And this was actually in our annual report, people saying, well, we go on hikes and we have yard sales, aren't we just a social club? What makes this religion? And so, you could say that in a negative way, as in I don't need religion, but I think people were saying, actually, I joined a church because I wanted to be in a church, but I need to figure out what kind of church I want to be in. And so we were working out the theology that then went with the music, that then went with the painting, that went with the people.
Yep.
And so it was a really great process.
Well, it's interesting how, again, issues with the building itself galvanizes creativity. The church has been through that several times. Just in its history, and it's watching it play out and reading about it from before my time, like in the early 80s. I mean, just these several, crises of different crises, not just with the building specifically, but finances or deficits or things that, because normally churches, if they're healthy, they're kind of this sort of passive Anglicanism. There's no reason to change until you're kind of forced with, a financial issue or physical issue or whatever, and that generates, and that this particular building has done that several times, which reinforces its identity, I think, just with,
So in that period, one of the other things we did was we stopped the pews being in rows. We unscrewed them and put them in a semicircle shape around the altar. And we started doing the Eucharist in a circle, a stand-up circle all the way around, and then the bread and the wine would come all the way around the circle.
Yeah, to do that.
And then we moved to having PowerPoint with the liturgy on the screen, hands-free, so that mothers could hold their babies. And some people would still do the bulletin, and some people would look up on the screen. And so there would be a Sunday where we would have the praise band, Glory, Glory, Hallelujah was their name, singing. And there we are with the PowerPoint, and we're not even holding bulletins anymore, and we're standing in a circle. Like it was a lovely, different experience of church that someone maybe 10 years before would have said, "Wow, I can't believe this has happened here." And in fact, we had feedback from people from the diocese saying, "Yeah, this is the church where lots of things happen. This is the place where creative things happen. If you want to know where new things are cutting edge, go check out what St. John's is doing, because they're probably trying it."
Yeah, I know. That's what kept us coming.
Yeah.
To fit us, our particular perspective on things, and and I saw all this happen myself, and so,
When I came back from the Sabbath leave, and people who had been part of the leadership team sort of handed things back, they didn't entirely hand it back, because we were now in the language of we need to have teams for things. And so we started to have, more focus on who would be the church wardens. Would there be committees of things that run things? The Christianity 101 kind of became a circle of things that were happening. Mm-hmm. And also at the same time, I had a number of students come and do placements here.
Yep.
And so there was Matt and Jeff earlier on, and then Elizabeth McKendry, and she went off to Winnipeg.
Right.
And then it was especially Alain Brosseau and Brenda
Stewart.
Brenda Stewart. And together they were here at the same time, and they stayed after their placements were done. And between them and Bob and me, we became this little pastoral team where I shared the preaching, because I have felt this sense of being called to be ordained by hearing other people do theology.
Right.
And to have my turn to hear other people offer theology was really life-giving to me, and so I was really happy to share that with them. So we had that leadership team, and then from the new people that had joined the church, we had new people becoming church wardens, including some of the younger couples. We had a 20, 30-somethings group, and some of those people became church wardens. And then the last kind of big thing of my time that happened was we had a same-sex blessing. We had Alain and Peter's same-sex blessing. That was in 2011. That was in the spring of 2011. And because there were restrictions about, the church had to demonstrate that no one was coerced into having the local option, and it couldn't look like a real marriage. It couldn't have vows like a real marriage. It couldn't be written up in the marriage register. So we came up with our own beautiful calligraphy book of a same-sex blessing register. Like we did so many things to make it feel special. Yep. And then we had the service, and pictures taken from the top of the balcony of everyone holding up their champagne glass, and the beaming couple, and it was really beautiful.
Yep. I'm not sure if I was at that or not, but I remember that happening.
Yeah, and then what also happened around that time was I had been involved in a church planting and church revitalizing working group as part of my connection with the diocese. And in fact, the praise band stuff came out of my connection with that. But the other thing was I was involved in some projects that were about revitalizing other church projects. And one of them, St. Anne's on Gladstone Avenue, I knew a lot about how it was set up to be a church plant. And then when things weren't going very well there, I kind of knew ahead of time that it wasn't going well, and I talked to the bishop about it. And the end result of that conversation was I was the one person that the bishop decided I should go and be there. And I had an interview. I was the only candidate. I had an interview with them and came to the realization of, I need to do this. And so my time at St. John's was a full decade plus 1 month, because at the end of September I went to St. Anne's. And so there was a summer of people knowing that I would be leaving, but it was really, a beautiful time of the wonderful relationships that we had developed
and it was
over time.
There's a certain limit on, 10 years is kind of natural life, and you went through a whole cycle.
And I think Christian Swain had been here that length of time.
Exactly the same.
Robert and William were here a shorter time.
The longest was Poole, by a little bit longer.
Yeah,
but I think,
yeah.
And then,
but I think Christian Swain had been here about 10 years. And in fact, I went from here to St. Anne's, where I was for 9 years. And it feels to me like the right rhythm for my own way of being on a journey
and Samantha
with
was a
people
similar...
is about a decade. And so just 2 years ago during the pandemic, I went to the next St. John's. And in a way, it's some of the same things about building community with the neighborhood and getting people fully engaged in the project of being who you are.
Yeah.
I'm doing that again. It seems like that's part of, for my way of being a priest, that's part of the process, is helping people to get to be who they are together in community.
I'm sort of like that as an historian, sort of making history matter and bringing out history for people, in this kind of setting, or, where places I've worked. This recognize the value of the history.
Yeah, so I want to come back to, there is one question you asked me earlier, which is really an intriguing question. It's about the mission statement we have. We are not a building, we are a community, and then the community listed all the kinds of people. And we made that into, first it was a Bristol board in yellow, kind of calligraphy. You don't have to buy into the whole package. Welcome to church.
I know, I love that.
Was the end of the statement, right?
Yep.
And
fitting the doors open.
That's right. And it became this thing that we had out front, and we really identified with, that's who we are. Well, we are not a building. We are these things. You don't have to buy into the whole thing. This is church. Welcome to church.
Yep.
And it was a lovely mission statement. And the interesting thing was the we are not a building part of the statement coincided with some very distinctive things we did with the building.
Yeah, exactly.
Such as especially the painting of the church interior, some really distinctive things we did. And in a way, it was a reminder not to go off to the deep end of idolatry and worship the building itself, right? It was we're about being a a version of Christianity that is passionate and spiritual and engaged in the neighborhood and tolerant and progressive. We aren't just about the building, but the building was important. And when we did the soul searching about should we just go rent, we realized, when you have a place to be, you can really do almost anything. If you're renting in some other church, you can't do almost anything anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so we came to the value of this is our home. This is each of us, this is like our third space, and this is where we are creating this identity. But it's not idolatry. It's faithful worship of God in a way that is progressive and has a vision of the neighborhood.
Sure. Well, I mean, in characterizing the 100th, it's our home on Humberside.
Yeah.
That's the. Yeah. If you look at all the logos we've done.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, again, it comes back to what I was thinking about. My particular relationship with this place. There's kind of like a home, an extra home. There's that homeness about it, and it sort of sums up that kind of feeling about it that people have.
Yeah.
That's a place to come. It's that third space idea beyond your workplace and your home space, that you can come, be comfortable, talk to people. And the nature of the colors and the whole personality, the identity.
And you probably have your distinctive ways of trying to reach out and do that. I just remembered there were a couple of ways we tried to do that, there's one of them, the Doors Open Toronto version.
Yeah.
I'm going to be doing that in Ottawa, the Doors Open Ottawa version. But the Doors Open Toronto version, it was an interesting exercise because we were trying to figure out how do we get people to come in the building. And it actually happened by accident that Doors Open Toronto was happening and Humberside Collegiate was in it, and they're next door, and they have some group of 7 pictures in there,
yep.
Murals actually. And we said, we're not officially part of the process, so we just put a sign up that said Open Doors instead of Doors Open, and the colors were new, and people came in and they liked it.
We had the opening of the colors just before that.
That's right. And so then we got in touch with the organizers of Doors Open to tell them we had done this and that we would really like to be in it the next year.
Yeah.
And I had been having some conversations with a business incubator just about ideas of being entrepreneurial, and I was telling one of the counselors at this business incubator about Doors Open and why we did it and what the impact was, and he said, there's another thing that you could do that would be like that, and that would be to have a community reading of A Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
And so there's so many things that happen in that decade that some of them
I know.
might forget, but to have all those big name CBC people be here for a packed house of reading of A Christmas Carol,
yep.
And I think we had 3 years of it where it was a lot of energy, yep. And we were proud of what we had, but it was a lot of energy, and we had to recognize right before Christmas that we didn't have always that kind of energy. Doors Open was kind of like that too. That to fill a roster of volunteers in the summer is pretty hard.
Well,
and we did it for I think 5 years.
2003, 2 to 8.
To 2008.
6.
And one of the things we discovered was people come from all over the city to come and see a church they'll never see again. And so we realized, okay, we actually wanted to meet the neighbors. We're happy to show the church to the rest of the city, but we have to think through again what will help us reach the neighbors.
Well, we're doing more local promotion. Like maybe in that when you did it, you were relying on the Star and the broader promotion. Like we have a maybe more active communications team, or we're doing a lot more focused on that. Like I'm putting posters up around, and plus we have the social media side, which didn't exist at the same time.
That's right.
So there's groups, there's local community groups.
We did an e-newsletter every week.
We're still,
and I took a lot of pictures, and I had actually on the worship schedule there was an assigned photographer every week, and the annual report became this beautiful picture book of the life of the place.
Yep, I know. I've been using them. Yeah. But that's kind of our focus too. And plus the 100th anniversaries are sort of a little different. I mean, when you did it was the windows.
Yeah.
And that's part of it, but we're trying not to and we want to emphasize the posters and the role of this particular place in this area, why it's here, why it moved where it is, our partnerships, the colors, these kind of key things that we've kind of evolved to become now.
Yeah.
And in an effort to get people in the door, as part of a broader initiative to have more partner-based events not relying on
Yeah,
everybody.
we did rely on big institutional things like Doors Open and
But
CBC, and also we did subway ads, and we had to deal with the media company to put an ad in the subway, and our ads were very homegrown looking.
Yeah.
And I think that had an appeal to it. It wasn't polished, but it had an
But
appeal to it.
a difference too is, when we were doing yard sales at that time, it was our own people bring in stuff to sell, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we've done more is to engage with the local people to bring in their own stuff.
Yeah.
And then charge them, we get 20% of whatever they happen to
Yeah.
sell.
Yeah.
And so it's much less work for us, but it brings people to the building. And so we've done that, our Holy Tea and yard sale, and we just had this Centennial Tea. And so we're using that model as a way to bring people in, but not over tax our own people at the same
So
time.
when I started, one of the things I said about starting in 2001 was that in addition to wanting there to be more roles for people to be here so that the attendance would go up, I wanted to encourage the distinctiveness of the space. So the colors was encouraging the distinctiveness of the space. But I think that also fostered recognizing and celebrating the distinctiveness and diversity of the people.
Yeah.
And that we really enjoyed that we had diversity, that we had differences, that we could celebrate those differences. I'm just kind of curious, what is that like now? Would you say there's a distinctiveness to the group of people that's here?
Oh, yeah. That's continued. There's a continuity. That's again, that comes back to just the nature of this space reinforces that. And just the way, and then we have obviously people have come and gone, but we've had some key people are still here. Evelyn or the Crummies or a few, ourselves even being here for as long as we have. And so we've got some context, some history to see what we've been through, and when we have a crisis, and we go through the MAP process, or we go through this or that. We've seen this before, so again, we have sort of faith in the space. Maybe it'll fall down, maybe who knows what can happen, but it just seems to be being negative doesn't really get you anywhere. And worrying about it so much, and sure, okay, we could use the money, maybe who knows, but things can happen, And it's a lot of it comes down to key people coming along, like when you came along, or other people have personalities. Like that's a key thing about history as a historian. You realize a lot of it's timing and people, key people at the right time, with ideas, with energy to galvanize change, to respect, to respond to their space, recognize, like you did with the colors and the kind of things you were doing at the time. So it comes back to the idea of the building itself is a catalyst for, and it reinforces the identity, because people come and go. So how do if totally different peoples that were here when you started, mostly, how do you still have the same, and I don't think it's much different now.
So the last time I was here in the building was for the funeral of a significant parishioner, Bill Dunford. I was, it was the summer, and I was coming through, and I made a point of timing it so that I could come to that funeral. And I sat in the congregation. I didn't have a role. I was just here to be, to celebrate Bill's life and to be, to grieve. And I was sitting in a pew and looking around, and it was a sunny summer day, and the colors were joyful. Yep. There's something about the joyfulness of these yellows and greens with this purple, and how the same colors shimmer out of the windows, that it's hard to put language to it, but you just feel joy sitting
well, that's
here.
when people come in off the street, we have things happen, and we're here, and Saturday morning, that's kind of our social kind of time.
Yeah.
Especially, it came out of the pandemic, especially, because we couldn't be in here, really. So people come in, and they say, oh, wow.
And that was the first question that Stuart Reed asked us when he did the consultation about painting the colors. How do you want to feel when you're sitting in this church? That's what he asked us.
Yeah.
And to be able to come back here, what is it now, 20 years later, and say, I feel joy when I sit here.
Yeah.
It's like Stuart Reed's question is still the one that helps you to say, okay, I'm really glad I can come and sit in a place and feel joy.
Well, I think that has that effect. I mean, it still has that, knowing the history of it, it still works.
Yeah.
And in the context of the ways the church is today and our own particular situation, again, to sacrifice that on a whim, whatever, and not really put the energy in it.
Yeah.
It just seems sad, it's kind of tragic. So unless, something major happens, But my sense of it, you have to kind of be positive and have a little faith, I guess, is kind of the message.
Thank you, Chris. This has been great to be here. It's great to review history. I found, because I knew your questions in advance, that it had all jumbled together, and I really had to think through, well, what order did things happen in? Because so many things happen in 10 years. I mean, I'm sure it's true of the 10 years that followed, but in those 10 years, it felt like so many things happened. And I needed to kind of sit with it to realize, okay, which thing happened first, and then what happened after that?
Yeah,
and to give a real sense of what do you call a blessed history, maybe.
Well, it was transformative. It was really transformative. I mean, things after, I mean, Samantha's time was distinctive, but it wasn't the same drive. Nothing really changed in the visceral sense, other than her own particular style and that kind of stuff. That's sort of a normal process. But, you know, we had our other, you know, ups and downs and whatever through that period too. But it wasn't as, you know, we didn't go through the same kind of dramatic changes at that time. We kind of continued on, you know, and adjusted and adapted. And then pandemics and things, you know, was another major change. And we do things hybrid now, and so that's been a really good.
It's great that you stepped up for the technology too.
Yeah, I was there through the.
Nice to see.
Well, I was there through the whole pandemic doing the managing Zoom. Literally, I was sitting over there, and Father David was there.
Oh, okay.
Or I was at home, and before we could even be in here, so I was there almost through the whole thing. Now I'm up there. Greg does a lot of it now, and so it's good. It's nice to reach out. I mean, it's another way to get people in the building directly.
And you have a worship schedule that has a technology person or several technology people in it. And
we have a team. We have you know 3 or 4, and we got
social media team, a technology team, in addition to people like readers and chalice bearers.
We need more people in general, but we're doing with students. Getting their hours. So Andrea's big on that. So we're getting a lot of young people in, helping with the different events. So again, we're sort of not farming out, but in terms of getting help when we have limited people, that's how we get help. Plus some of those people end up sticking around.
Yeah.
So that's how it worked out really well. So.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome.
This is great.
Hopefully it recorded okay.
Appreciate it, and I look forward to what comes out of it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.